The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. It was terribly cold, snowing and almost dark, but cold and dark as it was, a poor little girl with bare head and bare feet was wandering the streets. She'd had slippers on when she left her home, but they were much too large for her, and had fallen off her feet while she was running very fast across the road to get out of the way of two carriages. One of the slippers could not be found. The other had been snatched up by a boy who ran off with it, thinking it would serve him as a doll's cradle when he was old enough to have children of his own. Little girl now wandered on, bare head and bare feet, shivering with cold and with hunger. She dared not to go home, because she had sold no matches, and she knew her father would be very angry. Besides, her home was nearly as cold as the streets. It was an attic in a roof, and although many of the largest holes had been stopped up with straw and rags, the wind and the snow often penetrated through. Trembling with cold and hunger, she crept on. The snow fell over her long fair hair, which curled in pretty ringlets over her neck and her shoulders. But she wasn't thinking of that now, or of the cold. It was New Year's Eve, and it was of this that she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, one of them which projected beyond the other, she sat down, drawing her little feet under her, but in vain. She could not warm them. Perhaps one match from the bundle would warm her if she dared light one. She drew out a match and struck it against the wall. Whew! Shot up the flame, and it seemed to her as though she was sitting before a beautiful brass stove. How wonderfully the fire blazed within! She stretched out her little hands to warm them. Then she stretched out her little feet to warm them too. Then the match flame died away, and only the thick, cold wall was beside her. She drew out another match and struck it against the wall. Whew! Shot up the flame. And this time, wherever the flame fell, the wall became as transparent as a veil, as though the match flame had become a magic taper. She could see right into the room, a table laden with roast goose, piping hot and stuffed with apples. And what was even more delicious was the roast goose jumped down from the table and waddled along the floor right up to the poor little girl. The girl was just about to take a big piece of the roast goose when the match flame died away, and only the thick hard wall was beside her. She drew out a third match and struck it against the wall. Whew! Shot up the flame. And this time she was sitting by a beautiful Christmas tree, far taller, far more prettily laid out than the one she had seen in all the rich merchants' houses. How beautifully the candles burned. Thousands of candles were burning on the branches. The match flame died away, but the candles still kept burning, brighter and brighter, like stars in the sky. And one of them fell, leaving a long fiery tail behind it. And the little girl said to herself, now someone is dying. For she had been told by her old grandmother, the only person who had ever loved her and was dead, that whenever a star fell, a spirit returns to the kingdom of God. She drew out another match and struck it against the wall, and her grandmother appeared before her, beautiful as ever, but far more taller and more stately than she had ever seen her in her lifetime. "Oh, grandmother," she cried, "take me with you. I know you'll leave me when the match burns out. You'll vanish like the warm fire in the stove, like the feast and like the lovely Christmas tree." And she hastily lighted all the remaining matches in the bundle, lest her grandmother should disappear. Never had her grandmother looked so tall and stately. Her grandmother stretched out her arms towards the little girl, and they both flew together higher and higher and higher to the place where cold nor hunger or suffering is ever known. They were in paradise. Early the next morning, people found the little girl frozen to death on the last night of the old year, a bundle of matches in her hand, quite burnt out, and they said to themselves, "She's been trying to warm herself, poor little thing." But they didn't know of the lovely visions that she had seen, or how happily she and her grandmother were celebrating their New Year feast.